There is a kind of exhaustion that sleep never fixes. You wake up, go through your routine, answer messages, finish your responsibilities, maybe even smile when someone looks at you. From the outside, nothing seems wrong. But inside, something feels strangely absent. That it isn't exactly sadness, it isn't laziness, and it isn't that you want everything to end. It's more like you've been carrying an invisible weight for so long that you can't remember what it felt like to walk without it. The hardest part is that no one notices, because you're still functioning, still showing up, still pretending that tomorrow will feel different. And after enough time, a frightening thought quietly begins to appear. What if this is just who I am now? That question changes everything, because the moment you believe it, you stop looking for answers and start accepting the pain as your identity. But what if your mind has mistaken a temporary state for the truth about your life? The strange thing about emotional exhaustion is that it rarely announces itself, that it doesn't arrive all at once. It settles in quietly, disguising itself as stress, a lack of motivation, or just a difficult week. But as the days turn into months, something more dangerous begins to happen. Your mind starts searching for an explanation. The human brain hates uncertainty. It would rather accept a painful story than live without one. So it begins connecting scattered moments into a single narrative. Maybe I've always been like this. Maybe this is all life is. Maybe nothing will ever change. The more often these thoughts appear, the less they feel like thoughts. They begin to feel like facts. Without realizing it, you stop questioning the story and start organizing your life around it. You avoid opportunities because they probably won't matter. You distance yourself from people because you assume they won't understand. You stop imagining a different future because your mind has already convinced you that you've seen how the story ends. The frightening part is that none of this requires proof. A tired mind naturally pays more attention to disappointment than possibility. It remembers failures more vividly than moments of hope. It notices everything that confirms its fears, while quietly ignoring everything that contradicts them. Little by little, your world becomes smaller, not because reality changed, but because your perception did. And that's what makes this trap so convincing. When your own thoughts become the evidence, escaping them feels almost impossible. But if the story your mind keeps repeating isn't the whole truth, then the exhaustion you're carrying may not be your identity. It may be the result of seeing yourself through a lens you never realized you were wearing. Once you believe that nothing will change, another feeling begins to grow beneath the surface. Not pain, not sadness, emptiness. It's the unsettling sense that you're moving through life without truly participating in it. You complete tasks because they need to be done. You follow routines because breaking them would take even more energy. Days begin to blur together until weeks disappear without leaving a single meaningful memory behind. This is why so many people struggle to explain what they're feeling. They don't necessarily hate their lives. They just can't feel connected to them anymore. And when that connection disappears, people often look for bigger distractions. More work, more entertainment, more scrolling, more achievements. They hope that if they stay busy enough, the feeling will eventually fade. But it rarely does. Because the problem was never a lack of stimulation. It was a lack of meaning. There's an important difference. Pleasure can distract you for a few hours. Achievement can satisfy you for a few days. But meaning gives suffering a direction. Without it, even success begins to feel strangely empty. You reach goals that once seemed important, only to discover they don't answer the question that has been quietly following you all along. What is all of this for? Most people think that question appears at the end of life. It doesn't. It often appears in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, while you're driving home, sitting alone in your room, or staring at a screen after another exhausting day. And perhaps the most dangerous mistake is believing that this emptiness means something inside you is broken. What if it's the opposite? What if this feeling isn't proof that your life has lost its value, but the first sign that the life you've been living no longer fits the person you're becoming? What if the emptiness you've been fighting isn't your enemy? What if it's the last honest part of you refusing to keep pretending? Most people see emotional pain as something that should disappear as quickly as possible. They numb it, distract themselves from it, or bury it beneath endless responsibilities. Anything to avoid sitting alone with that uncomfortable feeling. But pain has an unusual characteristic. It doesn't always appear to destroy your life. Sometimes it appears because the life you've built is no longer aligned with who you've become. Think about it. There was a version of you that accepted routines without questioning them, that chased approval, productivity, or success because it seemed like the obvious path. But people change, quietly, almost invisibly. And sometimes your inner world changes months or even years before your outer life catches up. That's when the tension begins. You continue living the same days, surrounded by the same people, pursuing the same goals, yet something inside resists. Not because those things are wrong, but because they no longer answer the questions your mind has started asking. This is why the feeling can become so confusing. You may have everything you once wanted and still feel like something essential is missing. Not because you're ungrateful, because you've outgrown the life that once made sense. The hardest part is accepting that no one else can identify this for you. From the outside, your life may look perfectly normal. Only you can feel the quiet distance between the person the world sees and the person waiting beneath the surface. And maybe that's why this discomfort refuses to leave. Not because it's trying to punish you, but because it's trying to lead you somewhere your comfortable life never could. By now, you might be thinking, if I understand what's happening, why can't I just snap out of it? Because this isn't only happening in your thoughts, it's happening in your brain. When you spend weeks or months under chronic emotional stress, your nervous system slowly adapts to survival mode. Your body becomes incredibly efficient at anticipating problems, conserving energy, and avoiding anything that feels uncertain. At first, this response is protective. Over time, it becomes a prison. You stop doing the things that once made you feel alive because you don't have the energy. But without those experiences, your brain receives even less evidence that life can still feel meaningful. So the cycle repeats. You withdraw. Your world becomes smaller. Your brain interprets that smaller world as confirmation that nothing is changing. And that belief drains even more motivation. This is why waiting until you feel better rarely works. The feeling often comes after the action, not before it. A short walk, a conversation you almost canceled, a few minutes outside, one decision that interrupts the pattern. These actions seem insignificant, but your brain doesn't change through dramatic breakthroughs. It changes through repeated experiences that quietly challenge the story it has been telling itself. Every small action sends the same message. Maybe the future isn't as predictable as I thought. That is how hopelessness begins to loosen its grip. Not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because your brain slowly realizes that the story it believed was permanent was never the whole story. And once that possibility appears, even for a brief moment, something that felt impossible begins to return. Not certainty, not happiness. Hope. What if the question was never whether you're tired of existing? What if the real question is what version of your life has been asking you to exist? For so long, you've probably believed that something inside you had stopped working, that somewhere along the way you became weaker, more fragile, less capable of feeling what everyone else seemed to feel. But perhaps you've been measuring yourself against a life that no longer belongs to you. Think back to the beginning of this video. that invisible weight, the emptiness, the feeling that every day looked the same. None of those experiences prove that life has lost its value. They only prove that something inside you has been asking for change in the only language it knows how to speak. Pain. Not every painful feeling is a sign that you're moving in the wrong direction. Sometimes it's the signal that you've stayed in the same place for too long. The mind often interprets that discomfort as the end of hope, but sometimes it's actually the beginning of honesty. Maybe you don't need a completely different life. Maybe you need a more truthful relationship with the one you already have. One small decision, one honest conversation, one habit that reconnects your body to your mind. One moment where you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and begin asking, "What has this feeling been trying to tell me?" Because those are very different questions, and they lead to very different lives. So perhaps you were never tired of existing. Perhaps you were only exhausted from carrying a version of yourself that you've already outgrown. In the moment you realize that, the future stops looking like a prison. It starts looking like a place where you can finally become someone you were never able to be before.